Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting. And it's a pleasure to have all of you here today at ASPI for this special Women in Defence and Security Network event, which is very timely, given this Friday is the 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 and the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. We are very pleased to partner with the Australian Industry and Defence Network, AIDN, to host this event, and we'd both like to thank our event partner, Synergy, for helping make the event possible. The WPS agenda has long been a focus of ASPI's in our events and, of course, WDSN, as well as our research. The Institute's work in this area was pioneered by now senior fellow Lisa Stralen, who's continuing to do great things in the US, but who in 2017, and in partnership with 9 authors, authored ASPI's first strategic insight paper on the topic, entitled Women, Peace and Security, The Way Forward. Over 8 years on, there remains much, and in some ways too much, of relevance still today from that series. In her introduction, Lisa wrote that, within the context of defence, it's evident that strengthening women's participation in the security sector and integrating gender perspectives contributes to capability and operational effectiveness. Yet it's still an issue plagued by misconceptions, and that needs to be better understood. She wrote, despite the gains that have been made on WPS, global developments suggest that efforts to progress WPS will need to remain on the defensive. This was just one of many contributions that Lisa made to ASPI's research on WPS and peacekeeping. And I think Lisa and many of her co-authors and others have looked to turn defence into strategic offence. And ASPI's work in this area has continued to evolve, including through the WDSN, which celebrated its 10th anniversary last year. By building the network and working with other groups such as AIDN, we and all of you in attendance are helping to strengthen networks across the national security and foreign affairs sectors and encouraging more women to pursue careers in these fields. Diversity in all its forms, whether it be gender, culture, or thought, is vitally important to contestability and ensuring that we are identifying and pursuing the best policy outcomes. Much has been done in the area, but never enough is done in the area, which is why I'm delighted that today ASPI released a compendium on women, peace and security, in which multiple authors reflect on the anniversary of Resolution 1325, including progress made, and importantly, the work that still needs to be done. This compendium and the work of the WDSN shows the importance of not just celebrating progress, but also providing forums to have open and honest conversations about where we are and the direction towards which we need to move. Your interest in this topic probably means you are among those who are already having some of those frank conversations, and I hope you get a lot out of this evening's event and continue to have those conversations and have impact after it, including helping to bring more people into the issue. To help that, I do have the pleasure of inviting Australia's reasonably new Ambassador for Gender Equality, Michelle O'Byrne, to the podium to deliver some opening remarks before we begin tonight's panel discussion. Michelle, thank you, and over to you.
Can anyone actually see me while I'm standing here? It's not that the world was designed by men, but can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet tonight, the Ngunnawal people, and note that they have loved and cared for this unceded land for over 60,000 years. And thank Justin very much for allowing me this opportunity to join you all tonight. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. Can I thank ASPI's Women, Defence and Security Network and the Australian Industry and Defence Network for bringing us together for this powerful gathering. Are you noticing that I'm standing on tiptoes? I'm going to have great calves by the end of this job. To bring us together for what is actually a really powerful gathering of women who are shaping the future of conflict prevention, of peace and security here in Australia and importantly across our region. We meet at, my notes say a critical time when I wrote it, but it's a terrifying time, in fact. Around 600 million women, 15% of the world's female population, live within 50 kilometres of armed conflict. And you have to think about that for a moment. It's an easy thing to say. In the Ukraine, in Sudan, in Myanmar, and across the Middle East, we are navigating an incredibly complex geopolitical landscape We are countering the pushback of and weaponisation of gender, and we're all standing up and we're all leaning in on equality and equity. So as Australia's, as you heard, very brand new ambassador for gender equality, I step into this role with the deepest of respect for the many women who've led the way, peace builders, mediators, activists, practitioners, whose courage, leadership and persistence have changed what is possible for us all. And from First Nations women whose knowledge strengthens community resilience, to young women and those from diverse backgrounds leading change in their own right, each perspective enriches our understanding of what peace and security can mean. Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security was a landmark moment, a recognition that peace is more sustainable, more just and more enduring when it is built by and for everyone. And yet a quarter of a century later, the promise of that resolution remains unfinished. Women and girls continue to endure the devastating consequences of conflict-related sexual violence. In 2023 alone, UN verified cases rose by 50%. Nearly 1/3 of those affected were girls. And since I've taken this role, I can't tell you the amount of times people have said, oh, what a challenging time to be in this space. What a difficult job, what a hard job, what a lot of work you have to do. And my answer as someone who's been in the activist space and been in the space of advocating for women is, when hasn't it been a challenging time? When wasn't the fight for equality a really hard fight? And when hasn't there been a lot of work to do? We all lean in on this because this has been what women have done for generations. But as you all know, even in those most challenging and complex contexts, we've seen how women's leadership transforms the path to peace. And I wanted to talk about one case in the Philippines where women played a central role in ending one of Asia's longest running conflicts. For decades, communities in, I always get this wrong, Mindanao, and I'm looking at my friends here, yes, Mindanao, lived with insecurity and violence. But they refused to be silenced. They refused to let that be their norm. They built coalitions across ethnic, religious and political divides. They not only sat at the negotiating table, they belonged at the negotiating table. They helped design the 2014 Comprehensive Agreement on Bangsamoro, the peace accord that brought an end to decades of conflict between the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. And that agreement, shaped in part by women's leadership, including negotiators like Miriam Coronel-Ferrer, was not just about ending war. It was about building a peace that would include everyone and ensure that everyone would be able to live freely and have an engagement. And it worked because that peace continues to hold because women helped build it. And I don't recount it just because it's an inspiring story from our region, but it really is an inspiring story from our region. It is proof, though, that when women lead, peace can endure. Because we know the facts, and you know them all as well. Gender equality is one of the strongest predictors of peace, stronger even than a country's wealth or its political system or its democratic system. We know that peace agreements are more durable when women help negotiate them and shape them. We know that gender equality drives stronger economies, more cohesive communities and greater prosperity that lasts for generations. And we know that when gender equality is denied, it's not just women who pay the price, everyone pays the price. A world that is poorer, that is more divided, that is less secure. And that's why the Australian government remains steadfast in its commitment to the women, peace and security agenda. Because gender equality isn't an optional extra. It's not something we're going to do when we've got time or when the meeting is before us. It is a national priority and a cornerstone of Australia's foreign and defence policy. Through the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, we are investing in women's participation in peace building, supporting regional networks of women mediators, and embedding gender perspectives across defence, diplomacy and development. There is a review. Please participate in the review. If we're going to make this stronger, we all need to engage in that conversation. Across our region, from the Pacific to Southeast Asia, women are leading efforts to prevent conflict, to build resilience to climate insecurity and to strengthen governance. And they're the foundations of our regional stability and they're central to our shared future. As we mark the 25th anniversary, we're reminded that inclusive leadership isn't just a goal, isn't a nice to have, it's a necessity. Because women bring critical perspective, deep expertise and remarkable resilience to the work of peace building, defence and security. And today's discussions embody that truth and they challenge us all to take it further. Because this forum is both a celebration of the commitments that we've made, but fundamentally and most importantly, a call to action for the work we still need to do. Because whether you serve in uniform, whether you drive innovation in industry, Whether you shape public policy or lead in civil society, everyone here plays a vital role in building a more secure and more inclusive future. I'm especially pleased to see so many voices from our region have been participating this week, and particularly tonight, the Southeast Asian Women's Peace Mediators. And I want to thank Lilianne and Adelina for their generous time today and the conversation that we have. Because we know that their work shows the power of women's collective leadership. It shows the way that we can engage with authenticity, that we can engage strategically and differently to transform commitment into a lasting change. So today is about using this time to connect, to reflect, and to recommit to a bold new chapter of women, peace and security. A chapter that is intersectional, forward-looking, and grounded in real-world impact. Clever and maybe just a little bit fierce. Because when women lead, nations thrive, and peace actually has a fighting chance. So thank you very much. It's my job now to get Emma, fabulous Emma, where's Emma? Emma, you see, I'm too short. And Emma from AIDN, who's going to talk through how this panel's going to work and introduce them all and do the really fabulous work so I can just sit and enjoy and learn from some of the best. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd like to thank you, Ambassador O'Byrne, for your poignant and informative words tonight. And thank you for taking on a role that you have. It's so important for us to have this role in Australia, so we can go further with this. On behalf of the Australian Industry and Defence Network, I would like to welcome you all to this event this evening. For those of you who are not familiar with Australian Industry and Defence Network, or AIDN, AIDN is the peak industry association representing Australian-owned SMEs in the defence sector. Building a robust sovereign industrial base is as important as ever, and AIDN's mission is to support this through networking, advocacy and education. I just wanted to give a little plug for one of our key activities that we're running at the moment in AIDN, and that is our annual Young Achievers Award, which opened for the ACT Young Achievers this last week. This award recognises individuals under the age of 30 who have demonstrated outstanding innovation, leadership and dedication to advancing Australia's defence capabilities. And I'd just like to encourage you all to nominate yourself, nominate your colleagues, nominate your friends. Even better if you can nominate someone from a diverse background, whatever it might be. If you're not sure how it works, each state has their awards and then it goes into an annual award at sort of in the middle of the year. So we'd love to have as best possible candidates we've got in the ACT. I'd like to thank ASPI for hosting tonight's event and our event sponsors, Synergy Group and Prodigus Australia. As we all know, events like this aren't possible without sponsorship. And now I'll invite Raji up to the stage, the senior fellow, resident senior fellow from ASPI, to introduce and facilitate the panel.
Can I do this now?
Hi, good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to you all. Like all the previous speakers said, we are at the 25th year mark of the UN Security Council Resolution 3025 on Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which was considered a game changer moment in recognizing the role of women in peace and conflict, their efforts at leadership, their participation, and what all that means for just and lasting peace, which are essential for sustained peace building, national and international security. Okay, you couldn't hear me. I hope I was loud enough. Thank you. And since in the 25 years since then, women have become more prominent, taking on more leadership roles in a more determined and purposeful fashion, and seeking more active participation in shaping policies, institutions, processes, and solutions that could be sustainable. From talking about peace building and conflict resolution in their local bodies, women have gone on to make themselves heard in corporate boardrooms, parliaments, redefining the conversations on conflict, development, and governance to be inclusive and diverse, reiterating the point that peace and security are most sustainable when they are developed through an inclusive process, just as Ambassador actually said. So women want to be in the room, they want a seat at the high table, but they also want to be heard and want to shape the perspectives to make it a lot more meaningful and to say what women's participation at the leadership role can actually mean and what difference can they bring about. But this inclusive process doesn't happen on its own. It needs a lot of persistence, a lot of partnerships, and acknowledgement of the reality that including women is important because they represent the other 50% of the population. So we are cheering for all those who have been instrumental in making this milestone happen, but we still have a long way to go. And again, highlighted by the ambassador. And to take us through all of these issues in terms of where we have come from and how far we have to go, I think we have a stellar panel who come from, again, so many diverse backgrounds with a depth of experience and expertise. And again, I couldn't be more pleased to be moderating this discussion. We already heard from the fantastic gender ambassador already, but here we have 5 of the panelists here. Dr. Helen Durham, she's in the middle here. She's the CEO of RedR Australia. Lilianne Fan, co-founder of Southeast Asian Women Peace Mediators at the end. Adelina Kamal, she's again the co-founder of the Southeast Asian Women Peace Mediators. Wing Commander Catherine Humphries, Gender Peace and Security Advisor, Chief of Staff Branch HQ, Joint Operations Command, ADF, at the middle there. And Commodore Letitia Van Stralen, again, Chief of Staff, Navy Headquarters, she's right on next to me here. And my name is Raji, Rajagopalan, and I'm going to be moderating this panel. So I think let's start with a common question to all the panelists, looking at the whole leadership of women and what kind of, what does it make, how does it make a difference in terms of, so how has the role of women evolved and what does it mean for women to be leaders in the area of peace and conflict, disaster response, humanitarian conflicts and so on and so forth? How does it really play out? What kind of difference have you seen in a sense? Maybe I can start off with you, Tish.
Thank you. Certainly from a defence perspective, we've learned a lot of lessons through our operations, particularly in our region, our peace operations, our humanitarian assistance, particularly seeing those vulnerable people in the regions after a natural disaster, certainly having our women on the ground. We have women across all of our categories, all of our branches in the Defence Force, so it's really important to get our people on the ground and talking to the vulnerable people, men, women, children, and showing that there's actually that strength in community as well, and talking to them about their opportunities. What I've seen over the years, particularly in the Pacific region, when I first started to go to various forums, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were no women in their defence forces. So we've seen that progression. We've seen women in their navies, in their armies, in their police forces. It's really seen that growth in the region and that importance. I think, our navies and our defence force, in New Zealand particularly, Australia particularly, because that's our near region, have sort of shown the way a little bit for our ladies in the region. So I think that's been really important for us.
Thank you. From a humanitarian perspective, what having women in leadership does is shift the parameters. Traditionally, I think in my sector, it's do unto others as you'd like done to you. But increasingly, as you see women in leadership, it's where the more important do unto others as they want, whether it's the size of the way you distribute humanitarian assistance, but even some of the work both with RedR in deploying gender experts into places such as Sudan to really make sure that there's an understanding about where power sits within the community. Don't take it at face value. Who does really control the, I would say, the capacity for families to survive? And in a lot of my work I've done in the last 30 years, areas such as training non-state armed groups and the military on gender and prohibitions of sexual violence, when it's done from a leadership level, it's more nuanced. So for example, a lot of the work that I oversaw in West Africa in training non-state armed groups and the military against sexual violence, there was 3 distinct training packages. One for commanders that saw sexual violence was happening, but didn't actually care. And that's a very different way of training. One for commanders who saw it, didn't really care, didn't really understand why it was important, but were a bit null. And one for commanders who knew it was happening and wanted to stop it. And previous to that, there'd been one training package. And actually, when you're trying to shift cultural understandings of the importance of that, I think women leaders really are able to explain, speak to the communities. In some instances, the women that I've engaged with in the field, particularly also in the Middle East, they haven't wanted training done to the military or non-state armed groups. They've wanted a safe space created so they can sit with those who bear weapons and use lethal force and explain to them. So I think women in leadership are shifting some of the ways we think and also the need to listen more.
I'd like to say very much that I'm seeing quite a move to the forefront of women leadership within our Indo-Pacific region. I think that leadership from countries such as Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, those are leading that way to actually include their cultural backgrounds in their peace-building process within the region. Whilst Australia, New Zealand, our traditional cultures come very European, we need to work with those that we find in the region to make sure that we're meeting them on their ground so that we can help them. And those networks that are being built in places like PNG with their women's network, they've now got a gender advisor for the PNG Defence Force for the first time in the last, that was only just this year. And those are able to build those networks that we as the Australian Defence Force, in our case, and with our partners and allies, can all work together to create that strength in leadership. Because with that awareness, with those leaders from those countries, they can get their awareness from their own people, they can get the resourcing, and they can make the changes that need to be changed.
Well, from me, perhaps I should start on the importance of acknowledging the historical foundations of women leadership in this region. I come from Indonesia, a great country with 17,000 islands, and one of those provinces in Indonesia known as Aceh, you know Aceh, the place where we had the awful Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. But Aceh is also known as the birthplace for many of the most fearless women leaders and independence warriors. Back in the 16th century, Aceh, in fact, had the first woman admiral in the modern world, named Kamal Hayati. She's one of the national heroes. And her troops were drawn from Acehese women who lost their husband in the battlefields. Her troops, she led the troops of widows attacking the enemy ships and killed the commander, mano a mano, through the sword fight. So that's, I think, important, acknowledging this historical foundation, because when we talk about the feminist approach, when we talk about gender mainstreaming, there's not only one model. I mean, we have great examples from Canada and the Nordic countries with their feminist policies, but we also have other feminist approach, as long as they are grounded in the principle of equality, diversity, inclusion, solidarity, and justice. So it is important to acknowledge the long historical foundations of the different nations and countries in the world, in the region. That's number one. It is very important to contextualize what we mean by gender mainstreaming and feminist approach. I will be a laughing stock if I talk about gender mainstreaming in Aceh or the place where my husband comes from, West Sumatra, because they have long before I was born became the advocates of women. Another one, I think we should all remember that us sitting here, we have the privileges. We have the privileges of having a good starting point with education and all that. And I think we should stop thinking that we should be given that privilege. Because when you are out there, right, it doesn't make a difference whether you're a lion or a gazelle. There is an African proverb saying that when the sun shines in the morning, it doesn't matter whether you're a lion or gazelle. You just have to run, because no matter what, it is very important who got the meal first. You're either got eaten or you eat first, right? So I think it is important where we have that privileges that we actually do not think that we are women and we should be given the privileges. In fact, when I was put as the first female executive director of the ASEAN Coordinating Humanitarian Assistance, I forgot that I already broke the glass ceiling until some Pacific women came to my office and basically reminding me, Adelina, congratulations. But I didn't think of that because I was already busy thinking what I should do for the organization.
Fantastic. I am very tempted to do a follow-up Q question on, because even when we talk about women in peace and security and assuming leadership roles, we still have multitude of identities that we can look into in a sense. So the question of just a quick follow-up anyone can respond to is, how are we doing in terms of diversity and inclusion in terms of peacekeeping, security, peace and security sector in broad terms? Because I truly believe that unless you have an inclusive process in place, you cannot bring about sustained peace in a sense and lasting peace. So how are we kind of doing well enough justice to bring about that diversity of voices and perspectives into the room, whether it is in terms of social, cultural, gender, religion, region, all of those different identities, are they being adequately represented? I think that's a question I wanted to throw in there in case you want to kind of come back, or otherwise any of the other panelists, if you want to talk about it.
Well, maybe I'll speak on that. Raji, thank you. I think that from the perspective of inclusiveness, right? I mean, we're talking obviously about gender equality, but I think there is the issue of broader inclusiveness, which we really need to bring into the conversation, because in a peace negotiation, or in any conflict actually, it's a power struggle, right? I mean, armed conflict is always about power. And it's not only women who get marginalized in armed conflict, it's also lots of other, stakeholders, lots of other voices. Youth get marginalized, usually civilians obviously also will get extremely marginalized, and it's very hard sometimes for civilian voices and democratic voices and grassroots voices even to be part of any kind of discussion on peace. It's not as straightforward, right? I mean, I think that it's also important for us to recognize how difficult it is to even get a peace process started. The first conflict I worked on was Aceh, before the tsunami. And at that time, I was advising the Free Aceh movement even before there was a genuine peace process, right? And it was really sort of trying to understand what their aspirations were, trying to understand where there might be possibilities to build their understanding of, international frameworks and understanding of, what their aspirations were, and if there was a possibility to get them to ask for those aspirations in a political way rather than in an armed conflict dynamic. And it was very difficult even to engage with them, not because, engaging them was actually very easy, but getting them to think through if they had any opportunities to even articulate what their needs were in a different way. And that was very much because, number one, they were considered terrorists by the Indonesian government. And this is the case in many armed conflicts. The group that is resisting, right, the insurgent group or the rebel group, or, in Myanmar's case, the legitimate elected government is, which has now become a resistance to the Myanmar military, they're labeled as terrorists, right? And that frames things in a very difficult way. And then getting around those, restrictions, even for somebody who's trying to help to, even see if there's a possibility to sort of build conversations around peace building or peace engagement and dialogues, peace processes, it's very, very difficult. So I had to work in a very clandestine way for years, not able to even tell people I was working with the Free Aceh movement to advise them until after the peace agreement. And then it, was okay to engage them. But, the level of difficulty even in getting around those restrictions and bringing more voices to meet with them to even influence their thinking, even with civil society groups, for example, because anyone who was associated with them would have also been labeled as a terrorist, right? That's one thing. So getting women in is one thing, getting, engagement. They were already engaging women at the ground level, in terms of, a lot of women were the ones affected and, even their families were affected. So they did understand that. They also actively brought in women into their negotiation team, including one of our colleagues at Southeast Asian Women Mediators, Shadia Marhaban, who was, one of the negotiating team for the Free Aceh movement eventually. And bringing in those perspectives, but also, women and civil society, right? Civil society and actually the broader population. So having consultations with people affected directly by, the conflict for so many years, having them even give feedback to the armed group and saying, well, your conduct hasn't been very good in this place and that place, and actually, we would like to demand ABC, and if you're going into political negotiations, these are our priorities, right? It's not just a simple thing of, having an armed group go into a negotiation and where's the accountability, right? So I think that is a really critical part of it as well, and ensuring that, those people who are, those of us who are trying to bridge those dialogues and encourage armed groups to get into those conversations on peace, having those mechanisms to make sure that you are holding accountable, you are putting principles in, right? As Helen was saying earlier, it's absolutely critical. Some of them are better, some of them, you really need to start from scratch. But I think ensuring that, in our sort of desperation to have some kind of peace process, we're not overlooking those principles, because, rushing into a process as well, when it's not prepared, when it's not inclusive, where there's no groundwork done, where it's not principled, can actually do a lot more damage in the long run.
Fantastic. Thank you. So just moving into, again, looking at all of your backgrounds, Helen, I'll come to you first. Again, considering your role in establishing the international part of the criminal ICC, again, I want to look at the implementation of international law. So how do you look at the progress that has been made in embedding women's protection and participation into international humanitarian law and policy?
Certainly, and I'll try and be short, because I think what's so wonderful is we could have a seminar on each of us. So let me try and do some sound bites. I think one of the things, and particularly as we mark 25 years of Resolution 1325, I'm always a glass half full person, knowing we've got a long way to go. But, the old Eleanor Roosevelt, you can curse the darkness or you can light a candle. If you look at, Article 8 of the Women, Peace and Security Resolution, Security Council Resolution, requires women's involvement in peace processes. We know there have been 10 and only 4 have got a section relating to gender. That's 4 more than we might have got. And in my experience, working globally for many, many years, since the Women, Peace and Security, I've been able to have different types of conversations as 115 countries have done their national action plans. Now, those plans are in some ways academic. What we want to see is them having an impact on the ground. But what it does is, whether I'm talking to the Egyptian military or whether I'm talking to the Rwandan military, you've got an entry point to start because of this Security Council resolution. And what I would say from a legal point of view, the legal norms are stable in one way. So the Geneva Conventions, which have a whole lot of protection for civilians and combatants, written in 1949. Just as a snapshot, Article 27, which talks about the protection of women against sexual violence, because of the time, framed it around honour and to protect women against their honour. And then you see an evolution in 1977, where one of the resolutions, 75 of 77 law, talks about dignity. And then you see it evolving. And then you have the resolution and you have other processes, and you can do interpretations that move us forward. So I think what we have to do is not get overwhelmed by the fact of the horrors of what we see, because we do see them. And I think today we see them more in our face. We see the horrors in Gaza or Ukraine, whereas we know in Sudan, it's terrible. In Yemen, in Haiti, and it doesn't cross our mind frame. So I think we have to be aware, not overwhelmed, but also use each of these elements, resolutions and policy type frameworks, the law itself, to keep building upon each other as they moved. And I've seen some extraordinary developments over the time, but we always know there's a lot further to go.
No, that's absolutely true. And so we'll come back to it for sure. If I can come back to you, Adelina, I think if you can talk to us some of the whole mediating peace and protecting people agendas kind of thing. So what are the inherent issues that you see in the humanitarian and peace building sectors? And how do experiences of Southeast Asia help us see and confront these issues slightly differently? You can talk to us about that.
Well, first of all, before I became a humanitarian, I work in the climate change and environmental issues. And I'm still very much an environmentalist, I would say. And then I became a disaster manager because, as you know, the Southeast Asia is the 7-Eleven and supermarket of disasters, including my country, Indonesia, unfortunately. And then I got invited by the Southeast Asian Women Peace Mediators to join them, and I become the peace builders. But I often encounter this issue, and I'm going to be frank about it. And this is about instrumentalization and depoliticization of women, peace and security agenda, as well as humanitarian. So, and that I think is one of the deepest issues nowadays, that both humanitarian and peace building sectors is kind of like diluted. And women and humanitarian, based on my experience, are often used as the soft entry points. And we are not being honest about it. Well, what we want to do is basically tackling the real traditional security issues. And I think being dishonest about it is not fair for those that we want to work with. So that's number one. It gets depolitized and it gets diluted. And we tend to ignore the power dynamics when it comes to crisis and conflict. We tend to ignore that there is this power asymmetries and who basically holds the power, who defines peace, and whose security matters. So I think it is important for us, and based on my experience as well, that we need to tackle the structural and political drivers of the crisis, and we need to basically knock on the head, and really not afraid of calling it out. I mean, we don't have to be the strong advocates and put our voices everywhere. No, we can also be very strong in our discreet diplomacy. But we should not be afraid of actually elaborating and even mentioning what actually are the drivers of the crisis. And I think that is one thing that we need to tackle in both the humanitarian and peacebuilding industry. Second is the illusion of the silos. I mean, I move from development to humanitarian and now peacebuilding. And when we talk about the frontliners, such silos approach doesn't exist. They become peace builders, they become human rights defender, they become humanitarian at the same time, because the resources are limited and because the communities want them to do these things. They are forced to do it. And who are we actually fragmenting them into the sectors because we come from the gender office or we come from the development sector. So I think this is really a challenge for all of us. And because it is, we experience AIDCAS in many ways, how to actually make aid and our support much more effective, and using the ecosystem approach. Lilianne mentioned about the need to actually work with the others. Inclusivity is not only about getting women on the table. It's looking at the problem using an ecosystem approach. In the case of Myanmar, talking not only to the so-called state who's basically illegitimate and illegal, but more importantly, the non-state interim structures who are redefining, and many of them are women leaders delivering it themselves, who are redefining what it means to be a pluralistic state of Myanmar.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adelina. And staying on the region, I want to come to you, Lilianne. ASEAN's credibility as a regional security actor, I think it's come under stress enormous, so many different times, mostly because of the protracted conflicts now in Myanmar, and of course the recurring tensions on the Thai-Cambodia border. Again, so how, in your perspective, how do you see the ASEAN evolving in its approaches and mechanisms for conflict prevention and peace to address these complex security challenges? And what role do you in particular see Malaysia's ASEAN chairmanship has played in integrating sort of an inclusive, people-centered approach, including WPS, if you see that, how that plays out into the region's peace and security architecture, and broadly with the whole ASEAN's role as a security actor, how how credible it is and transferring.
Yeah, thank you, Raji. This year has, as we know, we've just had the ASEAN Summit in Kuala Lumpur, and it has been a really interesting year in terms of, looking at some of the, and I think it hasn't actually been in the media so much, some of the very quiet approaches that have been taken throughout the year on trying to move forward, the process of engaging Myanmar, right? ASEAN's engaging on the Myanmar crisis. That has been very outside of the public eye because we've had to keep it outside the public eye until now. But the Cambodia-Thailand crisis obviously has been a lot more in the media. But I would like to say that, what we were talking about in terms of inclusiveness, right? I mean, actually, Malaysia's theme for ASEAN this year was inclusivity and sustainability, right? And that was a really great way for us to bring that into the approach on Myanmar. So I've been advising this year the Office of the ASEAN Special Envoy on Myanmar, Tan Sri Othman, and Tan Sri Othman, they started engaging me last year and said, please help us with a stakeholder mapping of who to engage on the Myanmar resistance side. How do we, design a process by which we can bring in these groups? Who are they? I mean, Myanmar, for those of you who are following, is not one conflict. It is many different conflicts. It probably has the largest number of armed, ethnic armed groups in the world right now, fighting in a civil war, which is extremely complex. There are so many conflict dynamics that are happening in this one country, and they're not all post 2021 after the coup. A lot of them actually go back to, Myanmar's independence period as well. Plus, of course, you have the genocide of the Rohingya, and that the consequences of that still in Bangladesh, over 1 million Rohingya who have been basically forced to flee, and lots and lots of problems there. So how did we deal with this, right? How did we try to get Myanmar on this engagement, which, it's an extremely complex situation for ASEAN to deal with. And ASEAN is, tied by its principles of non-interference and all these things. On Myanmar, I have to say that it's actually already very unusual for ASEAN to even have a mandate to focus on one member state in a way that is addressing an issue which that member state sees as an internal issue, right? So from the very beginning, which, for those of us who have worked with ASEAN and are tracking it, it was really already quite a breakthrough that the 5-point consensus was developed by leaders and was established. It has not been, working quickly because the Myanmar military actually just ignores it, even though General Min Aung Hlaing agrees to it in the beginning. He really has basically ignored it, all this time. But I think what was different with Malaysia is that Malaysia used this 5-point consensus in a way to really bring in a very inclusive group of political, stakeholders, including those with a lot of women leaders, but also including, so it was the NUG, the National Unity Government, a lot of the ethnic armed resistance organizations, but also, representative bodies, consultative councils, the resistance parliaments, the civilian resistance that's been developing, also double minorities who actually don't have proper status in Myanmar. So the Rohingya were in the room, as a political entity, not as a civilian or, humanitarian recipient of aid, but actually as a political entity that needs to be at the table in these negotiations. We had Burmese Muslims at the table as well, another double minority who have citizenship but are still very extremely marginalized. And we've had some of the very, very tiny ethnic groups as well who have never had political representation at the table but are there. And even the Burma majority, right? So there are a lot of resistance groups that have emerged from the Burma majority, from Mandalay, from Yangon, from Mugway and Sagaing and all of these places. They were there at the table as well. So it's been a much broader group of stakeholders, political stakeholders that has been engaged. A lot of youth and a lot of women have been around the table. And this engagement has been taking place throughout the year. It's been very quiet because we had to keep it quiet. We haven't been able to share it until now. Now the stakeholders have come out and actually said we've been engaged the whole year by the Malaysian, envoy, which has been really good. And sustainability in terms of really trying to make sure that this is not just something that happens this year, but this is a process that will be continued, by the new chair, the incoming chair of the Philippines. There's already been handover work that's being done. And that I think is it's a very new kind of approach, which I think is hopeful for an extremely complex conflict it may not solve the conflict, but it gives it a chance to, for some very critical actors in the conflict to come together and strategize, engage ASEAN, have some role and feel like they are genuinely ASEAN, people of ASEAN that ASEAN cares about. And I think that itself is extremely important. And also, having the ability to also then, pull from that mandate of, WPS. Everybody knows what WPS is now. We, have national action plans, but also ASEAN held events, right? And, was supported by Australia as well, that really supported the WPS agenda, and linking those up and thinking, we can ensure that we are talking about WPS, and in the discussions, on the Myanmar crisis as well, making sure that the issues around, the impact on women and all civilians was really being discussed in a very substantive way, talking really about how do we actually try to, it's a very difficult crisis, a very difficult conflict, but what are the opportunities? What do the resistance groups see as opportunities for de-escalation, opportunities for greater protection of civilians, opportunities for any type of dialogue, even just on the humanitarian, access issue, all these types of things, very, very detailed and substantive. And if we didn't have those mandates and those agendas, it would have been much more difficult to have those discussions.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just as you were making your last point, I was reminded back in the 1980s, late 80s, when there were two major conflicts. Sri Lankan conflict was full on, and of course Sierra Leone. Both conflicts were full on. And I remember reading about this in a conversation. Somebody wrote this in a book. One of the feminists, I'm just forgetting the name, but she was talking about a meeting room in New York, and there was one female amongst all the men in the room around the table, and she said women and children are the most affected in any conflict, and in particularly looking at these two conflicts. And the men around the table actually turned around and said, I think we are moving away from the core topic. So how far we have come,
that's right.
these things demonstrate. If we are able to talk about the WPS agenda and people are familiar with it and you can talk about it, I think we have traveled quite some distance, I would say, even as there is more to be done. Tish, let me come to you. Again, you are one of the handful of women who have reached flag rank in the Royal Australian Navy. I think the first one was in 2011. How has your career and experience informed your view of the progress made? And in particular, I'm kind of keen to hear what kind of personal or institutional factors may have made this all possible, or at least what you see as most critical in breaking some of the barriers. And talking about barriers, what barriers still exist in the system for an enhanced female representation, and for them to move up the ladder and to take on to more managerial leadership roles and kind of thing.
Okay, thanks, Raji. I'll just correct the record. My rank is Rear Admiral now, and I'm head of military personnel. So I actually look after all of everybody from the point of recruiting right through to when they transition and all of their career management in between. So I joined 30 years ago in 1995, and I have certainly seen a huge cultural change over the years. I was often that one woman sitting at a table, and I worked, I've had a varied career as a maritime warfare officer at sea, as a legal officer, and now in HR. So I've seen different perspectives, and certainly sitting in Joint Operations Command, I did 3 postings out there. And in those early years, I was definitely the first woman, the only woman in the room. Progressively, it didn't get much better for a long time. But having a voice in that room really started to make, I feel I've started to make a difference. We then had a gender advisor come out to be a part of the Joint Operations Command as well. And they became a very important voice in the room as well, so that we could understand when we're going on any operation, whether it's peacekeeping, humanitarian, any sort of humanitarian aid, conflict, there was always a consideration then of what it meant to, under 1325, what it actually meant to the vulnerable population. So I've seen that evolve over a number of years. And certainly for us, Navy, we have over 24% women in our Navy right now. We are growing, and we are seeing more and more women joining. We don't have targets for women. We obviously encourage women. We have specialist recruiting people that go out, ladies that go out visit schools, visit job events, all those sort of skills forums, those sorts of things, to encourage young women to think of us as an option, as a career. Because I can, from my personal perspective, it's been a fantastic career. It continues to be a fantastic career. One of 4 female rear admirals. I've reached the heights I never thought I possibly could. I was probably really thrilled to reach commander about 5 ranks ago. But the opportunities available to our women now have opened up in every category. We have combat and security, categories within our Defence Force. We have women in the infantry. We have women driving ships, commanding ships, flying aircraft. It's really great to see that we now have also women mentors, women role models, because when I joined, there wasn't very many. And, we had to break through that glass ceiling really to find our way through. And at times it was really difficult. We were sometimes just having to be one of the blokes and, go along and have the beers and do everything else and be blokey. But we found our way at some point in there and decided that we could be our authentic selves. But our diversity is so important. It's not just about our women, it's also about our First Nations, our LGBTQI. It's about everybody. It's about making sure that everybody has a voice. And I think that diversity and inclusion is so critical to the voice in the room, to making a difference. And just a small anecdote, because I'm sure Kat needs some time too. When I was deployed to the Middle East in the Persian Gulf on a US ship. We were part of the task force, the command task force, Australian staff on a US ship. So interesting dynamics there. I learned a lot from that deployment. So in Iraq, we were going over to the oil platforms, security around those oil platforms, and there was Iraqi Navy patrol boats. And I was going over with my team to go over and train the Iraqis on rules of engagement and, all those sorts of things. And some of the Americans said to me, "Oh, they don't like women. They just won't like you at all. Be very careful." And I said, "Oh, it's okay. I'll be fine." Anyway, we've got over there, and I just, it's women tend to be able to use soft skills particularly well at times. Not everybody, but we try to. And you they realise when you're capable and competent, you know what you're talking about. And that you actually treat them with respect as well. And they were all men. It was an all-men male Navy. They were suddenly offering me drinks and happy to listen to me. And they just treated me like everybody else. Actually, they treated me a little bit special. I think they offered my husband some camels for me. But anyway, but, it was a great experience to actually see, women can do anything in that sort of environment. And we should never, ever be held back by the fact that, it might be a confronting environment. It's actually that we can go forward and talk at the same level and hold our own and actually, show men particularly in those sorts of environments that we are competent and capable people. So that was a great learning experience for me. And I still value that time.
Fantastic. Staying on the same theme of defense and coming to you, Kat. There's again a lot that you can talk about how defense is integrating the gender perspectives in terms of operational planning. But one specific question that it was looking at slightly in a broader frame, maybe how is Australia championing the WPS agenda in the Indo-Pacific region? Again, something we touched upon. I think Lilianne or Adelina did touch upon, but I think I want to take that and see what can Australia do in partnership with Southeast Asia, as well as in the Pacific neighborhood, to strengthen the WPS agenda across the region. Again, give us a sense of your own role as the your gender, peace and security advisor as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Raji. As Tisha's already said, she was there when we introduced gender advisors to Joint Operations Command, and so that's my current role as the Senior Gender, Peace and Security Advisor to the Commander of Joint Operations. For the Australian Defence Force, our Joint Operations Command is that area that looks at all of our defence operations, both inside Australia, but certainly out in the region and across the globe. The Army, Navy and Air Force, their participation, their female participation, that the Navy, not quite the percentage that the Air Force has got yet, 27, but you're getting close. You're winning. 27% for the Air Force. So that participation is what we draw on in Joint Operations Command to make sure that we can deploy forces, that we can make that effect out in the region, across the globe, to make those changes. But as I mentioned earlier, we need to make those changes with the people that we're working with. And it's all about building capacity, building resilience. As we've seen recently with our National Defence Strategy, we're looking at defence by denial, and that is a big part of national resilience. And that's not just for Australia, all nations. Conflict doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with people. And it's understanding that human terrain across gender, across religion, across society, economics. We need those voices to be heard. And we do that by ensuring that myself as a gender advisor, working with the whole team out at Joint Operations, from the planning to those events where we're building networks. We're either applying soft power. We have a very strong role in what's known as Indo-Pacific Endeavour. That is our, I suppose, flagship activity where we engage with the region on the soft power side, build those networks that we can then develop and then capacity-wise go into exercises. We've just run the largest Talisman Sabre exercise that we've ever had. We're up to 19 countries, which was originally just Australia and the US. We're now involving much more of the region in that activity. And we include, as gender advisors, we include gender perspectives within the planning of that exercise and scenarios within that exercise. So that all that training that we're doing with our people across the region, they can put that in practice. They can have those scenarios so they can see how the different conflict is impacting or how a disaster is impacting more and more with climate change, as Adelina said. We need to make sure that these disasters that are occurring more and more often with climate change, just as much as with human conflict, that we're involving all voices in that, especially women, and we need to build that capacity across the region. Those activities that we are involved in, we try and make sure that we build each year, that we try and make sure that we're working with those networks. We involve them in activities throughout the year so that the next year we can build a greater capacity. More women leadership, as Tish is one of those within the Australian Force. We're seeing that within all the defence forces and the organisations that we work with. And that includes civil society and very much engaging that from the military side of things. Something we haven't always done great. The defence and the military seem to sit aside, and that needs to change. We need to work together because, just as already has been said, this is not a silo thing. Human security is across it all, and it is a fundamental part that we can ensure that peace and stability can reign supreme in a country if there are all parts of society are involved in that process.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take up all the, I can continue this conversation, but I think I'll take a few questions from the audience as well, and then come back to you later for one round. Yeah, so, is there a question that we do?
So I work the area of cybersecurity, and obviously there's a huge push to try and get more women into the field of work in cybersecurity. We have a big issue, obviously, that a lot of people who have graduated in the last 5 to 10 years from anything in STEM related fields or like IT, computer engineering, etc., are predominantly male. And we have a lot of women who are interested in transitioning into the field of cybersecurity, and I'm sure into other areas in national security that you all work in. I'm wondering how we can support women in, mid-careers to transition into those spaces, because I think there's a lot of great work done for early career professionals. We have various pathways in different government organizations, in private sector, to try and get women into, gaining technical skills and whatnot. But how can we help women who, are transitioning into fields that were previously always dominated by men? Thank you.
For any particular panelists or for anyone?
This is for anyone. And I know I've come from the cybersecurity slant just because I'm in that field, but I know that is applicable to a lot of domains. Thank you.
I can certainly start off noting that recruiting is one of my big focuses. in our attraction piece, we make sure that all of our, our media, our advertising puts different genders, different positions, and people, young women see that there's a woman sitting there doing space and cyber security, whatever they're doing, or they see themselves as an engineer, or they can see themselves as a pilot, or whatever it is. It's visualising for us. But there's that visualising part. There's the part where we get out and speak to, as I mentioned, at schools and events like that to encourage young women to think about that. But it's really about making it attractive. And we're all suffering trying to, recruit enough women into those STEM roles across industry, within defence. I think we're all really struggling to get that. And I think it is about building our women up from a younger age to actually encourage them to know that they can do it and to think about, STEM as a career path. And I think it often gets missed. Young women tend to go into more of the humanities type focus and don't seem to be tending towards down that science sort of streams and technical and engineering sort of mathematics, all those. So I think it's really about engaging women early, but then also then encouraging women as they get older and into that mid-career entry, as you say. We're really focused on providing education and skills to people. So we invite anybody of any age group up to 55 to come and join. And we provide those skills. So I think it's what you open up in your advertising and how you actually sell that to people, getting out to those job skills sort of forums and things like that, and actually having the women there talking to other women. Because I think for a lot of women, it's like, if you look at 10 criteria in an interview, the old saying, I can only do 5 of them, I'm not going to go for it. A guy will say, I can do 4, I'm going to go for it, So I think it's just women seeing women doing is a really big part of it.
Can I just add in on that from a different perspective? As you say, we cannot be what we cannot see. So I think there's something about the leadership. But then there's something also we have to balance about the expectations that you then put on women who are leaders, and that's another whole seminar in and of itself, because it's very easy to say if things go wrong and blame it around that. We just ran, RedR just ran a course, AI for Humanitarians online course, and I was delighted to see at least 50% of the people globally that attended were women. To be able to say it from another point of view, cyber crime, cyber attacks are increasing. There's a deep gendered element in that. I sit on a board for Meta on human rights advising, and all the ways that non-kinetic attacks through cyber warfare. So I think we need to say we need women in there for diversity, but we need women in there because it's a women's issue too, and we need to have leadership. So I think along the spectrum, there's many things we can do.
If I can add, I'm a true believer in you see it and you can be it.
Yeah.
And actually, I got it from one of the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement events.
Oh, good.
But also, if I can add on, I think it is good, in the spirit of you can be it if you see it, to narrate the stories to help those the younger and those in mid-career, because I think when we are in the leadership positions, and I must admit, sometimes we are too busy, right, with our career, and we forget that, and we tend to take our experience and leadership journey for granted. And it is actually very much valuable if we narrate our stories a little bit more, because that's where education starts. If we can see it, we can be it. Or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
I'd highlight, and your question was very much that mid-career type, where you're looking for that next step and you're looking for that involvement from the higher-ups or the organisation to grow. Something very close to my heart, I sent my 17-year-old daughter to Texas for Robotics World Championships. I think they came 6th, so they did pretty well.
He's joining defence?
She's considering.
No, I want her in the humanitarian section. Right over.
But it's something that we really need to be aware of within the processes of human resources, because if you're making those first steps within an organisation, you are still coming up against that unconscious bias. For myself, within security forces, within Air Force, I'm only one of 3 officers in my category out of 100. So that kind of institutionalised barrier needs conscious effort to overcome. And that's what we do face opposition to, when you try and bring that up and trying to make sure that people understand that they've got an unconscious bias, but it needs to be done and it needs to be spoken about and people stand up against it.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you all more. I think a couple of things that I see is one, even not just about mid-career, but even getting women into these areas in a sense, STEM education or any, and if the handful of women who come into security issues, they very quickly also move into soft security issues. Again, I have no disrespect to those sectors, whether it is economic security, water security, food security. They don't want to do hard security issues. And I think they continue to there is a belief that, oh, these are very male-dominated areas. I don't have the competence to do it. So that's where I think seeing more women in leadership roles or a senior role, in a sense, that makes a lot of difference for them to feel confident that this is an area that I can do as well. This is something that is not exclusively for men and you can do it. Again, not using women, again, a point that came up is also, then you're not using an entire body of expertise, talent that is available. You're losing it out on. But more than anything else, to me, I think the most important point is that they represent the other 50% of the population. They need to be able to have those choices. They need to be able to make their own choices and choose the path they want to go, whether it is security, non-security, whichever way. I think that, so how do we and when do we reach that stage when women can choose and decide, okay, this is the path that I want to take in a sense. And I think we still have some way to go, but I think we do see more and more women come up, but many of them I do see at least at the level of mid-level kind of mid-career positions. But again, going up beyond that position to a leadership level, I think that still remains some bit of a challenge in a sense in many countries. Australia has done by and large well, but I think there is still some road to travel in a sense. Any more questions? Yep. Okay, I'll just come to you at the very back.
Hi, thanks, ladies. My name's Prue Rhodes from Rhodes Advisory. I have an international question. So with Donald Trump and his administration dialing back equity and diversity measures, is that making impact on the international stage? And are you seeing other countries withdrawing the measures or stepping back?
Should we take a few questions, maybe?
Yeah, that'd be good.
I have the same question, actually.
Okay.
If you want to, okay. You want to ask? No.
Maybe I'll start. Not so much take aside, the articulation of President Trump, just in relation to, say, in my area, the loss of about $80 billion in the humanitarian and development space, where suddenly the programs that get cut first are often ones that are seen around women and diversity. And this whole, my big argument, I wrote something for, I'm a senior fellow with West Point Military Academy Library Institute. I wrote a piece with another commander saying, the centre is wrong. We have to put what people think is the edges in the centre. And by what I mean by that is, we've had the statement for a long time, you can't just add women a mix. It's not an add-on. And the problem that is happening globally, and it's not just through the loss of US aid, it's through the Europeans and others, the stripping away of humanitarian and development funding has an increased compounding adverse effect on issues that we've built over a long time in relation to understanding that it's not the centre, it's not the nice to have, it's the central to hardcore military articulation. And so I think that's something certainly that in my sector we're experiencing. Just on that, I think one of the most powerful benefits of Resolution 1325, Women, Peace and Security, is the Security Council used to be seen as the masculine place, the place where really hard norms were fought through. You can use Chapter 7, so you can use force. And 1325 opened up what was seen as a sidebar, women NGOs at the General Assembly, and put it right in the middle of where security is understood. And I think that we are seeing an erosion of that because in the field, when I go out there, when I see our deployees and I go myself into places, we see that there's a lot of stepping back, both politically but also economically. And I think we need to push harder against that and be clearer and stronger and more evidence-based on the important role that women, peace and security play. And that's not the first thing that should go when there's a lack of funding.
I'll expand on that too, because just yesterday, 24 hours ago, the United Nations announced a 25% cut on all of the peacekeeping missions across the world. We are facing a situation where that erosion of resources, of money, is forcing not just the US, but many countries to try and prioritise what they're doing. And we need to make sure that women peace security does not soften the effect. It sharpens it. It ensures that you're looking at that human terrain. You're making sure that your mission is effective in gaining that peace right through the cycle, right from the initial indications of the preparation, capacity building, resilience, through conflict, through to peace building post-conflict. It sharpens that. It does not soften it.
If I may add, I would see Donald Trump not as a threat, but as an opportunity. An opportunity for Australia as a middle power, an opportunity for Southeast Asia too. Because right now, I think the world is also looking into alternative models, fresh and creative alternative models. This is what actually the colleagues in Afghanistan told us when they visited Southeast Asia, when they came to Aceh, when they came to Jakarta, because they're really looking at these different models of a Muslim world educating women and children, right? That we do have our own feminist approach, and actually show that, you know, this exists in other parts of the world. And they said that, oh, I'm sorry, but we're sick of the Western approaches. But, well, perhaps this is actually the opportunity for us, the middle power. That's number one. And number two, some other Asians actually asked the same question that you asked. And I said, like, well, isn't it actually an opportunity actually for us to even do more? For us to unite. And when it comes to the reduced aid for, you know, many sectors, humanitarian, defense, peacekeeping, then it is actually the more reason for us to make our work more effective and to really tackle this siloed approach, including when it comes to addressing climate change. And I will talk about it later.
I just want to add to that as well, Raji. So I think, I mean, from my work, you know, it does make it a lot more complicated and challenging. And I would say, again, not to talk about, you know, the Mr. President himself, but actually on the aid cuts. And I'll talk mainly about the impact on the camps in Bangladesh, right, and on the Rohingya, and how it's affecting Rohingya women and girls. You know, the aid cuts it's not the first slash. We've had a slash already before. And the Rohingya were basically getting $12 a day, right, from food aid. And it was USAID funding, WFP for $12 a day. $12 a day is already extremely low for, you know, food per head per person in the world's largest refugee camp, right, Cox's Bazar. That was then slashed further to $6 a day. And when I was there in August, you know, went to visit WFP, we were being told we have no more funding. And, you know, thankfully, there's a bit more funding that's just come on stream again, that has been pledged, but it's up and down, right? And, you know, how long is that going to last? Maybe another year. This crisis, you know, is going to go on for many years to come because it depends on, you know, resolution of the situation in Myanmar, which we know is going to continue for years to come. As much as ASEAN's trying to do and others are trying to help, it is not going to be easy to resolve it. And the most difficult part of that conflict is actually getting the Rohingya citizenship and ethnic rights and their land rights and everything to go back as citizens and not face genocide again. So, you know, the impact that the aid cuts are having is very real for every single Rohingya woman and child, right? It means that a lot of them have to go into other forms of livelihoods, right? And other forms of livelihoods include things which put them at very great risk. It includes, you know, subjecting themselves to sexual exploitation. It includes also the decisions of Rohingya parents to marry their daughters off much younger. So child marriage is already, you know, it's something which is really affecting the Rohingya community. And it's not a cultural issue or an Islamic issue. It's a protection issue. This is absolutely a protection issue. You know, it's not that Rohingya parents think, oh, this is a nice Islamic thing to do and let's marry the kids off. No, it's because they've never had education. They've never had protection in Myanmar or now in Bangladesh. The only way, especially now, for a, you know, family not to have that extra economic burden on themselves is, to be able to marry your child off and get a little bit of dowry, right? And that is one of the reasons why Rohingya are taking these boats to Malaysia, because they're marrying men, very often by mobile phone, who are in Malaysia, and then taking these dangerous journeys. They know these journeys are dangerous and they may die, but it's much better than starving to death in the camp or, being subjected to human trafficking when you're kidnapped and, sold, right? Better your parents actually marry you off. It's a huge impact, right? And it's just going to make things worse and worse. And it's already a trend which has been going on for a very long time. We've just had a few boats arrive in Southeast Asia. I mean, it's dreadful. It's absolutely dreadful. And, I think that looking at this, human security and, in Australia, we're also looking at, your policies, right? And it's not one thing or another. I mean, these things are so integrated, if you cut aid here, you're going to see an impact here. Yeah. You see the rise of violent extremism in the camps again. And that is, something which is also, not being counted, right? It's not being counted because the aid is being cut. The support for, democratic, institutions and peace building and practices and, WPS and youth, peace and security as well. I mean, that's such a critical piece of it. This is all eroding and it's disappearing. And what are the youth in the camp doing? I mean, they're sitting around waiting for somebody to come and inspire them. And there are lots of people out there inspiring them, but they're not always the right ones, right? So it's really something that we have to be very, very, very attentive to. And I think these consequences are very, very dangerous.
Yeah, I can just kind of relate to what Adelina said in terms of finding this and being an opportunity. Because even if you look at slightly different, not exactly on this particular issue, but if you look at international politics, regional security, alliance politics, strategic partnerships, everyone is now hedging. Everyone is trying to see what are the other partnerships that might work out. They are not saying that the US is not required, but they are also looking at a scenario when the US may not be there around, and they're going to. So many of the regional countries are actually beginning to shoulder much bigger responsibilities, security responsibilities. Looking at a scenario where the US may not be there to kind of come to their side on their side. So I think this, again, when you look at this particular issue, again, this provides an opportunity for us to kind of step up our own kind of proactiveness and how we engage this whole agenda in a sense. But at the same time, at least we are going to feel short-term pains in terms of the funds available and so on and so forth. So that there are some short-term pains that one has to go through. But I think in the longer term, I think we are okay. But you also, even in the US, despite the fact that the administration has this kind of an approach, you still have a lot of civil society voices that are still looking to strengthen the DII aspects and so on and so forth. So it's a sort of a mixed picture at this point of time, I would think. Other questions? Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Given you are working in these vulnerable security contexts, how do you balance that sort of approach to humanitarian and development principles still without falling into that prejudice trap of women only expressing soft skills?
I'm going to take one more question. Yeah. Okay.
My question's slightly different. There's a few people in the room that work with SMEs, particularly in technology here, which, as we're talking, I'm thinking we kind of work at the grassroots level. We're local. We do work with, defence and industry, that kind of thing. How can we support the efforts of WPS and make a difference at our level?
Thank you.
So I can go first on the first question about, so you're talking about like putting people in a box and saying you're here for the soft skills, you're not here for anything else. Is that where you're sort of going with that? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, from our perspective, from a defence perspective, we don't do that. We offer every opportunity for our ladies to undertake any role in the Defence Force. So we're very much encouraging people to get outside of that. If I look at the number of women in those, health, logistics, enterprise command type roles, that administration, the softer sort of skills, those sorts of things, yes, there are higher numbers, but we are seeing growth in our combat and security roles as well, in our engineering roles, and we're encouraging that. We're encouraging our women to actually step outside the norm and be whoever they want to be. We encourage female technicians across aviation, marine, We are very much focused on trying to have our women in every environment. We talk about a critical mass, which is 25%. If we can reach 25% women's participation rate in a certain category or a certain area, it changes the culture. And that's what we're really focused on. And for defence, our cultural change is so significant for us. And as I say, over 30 years, I have seen us change to a very, very much a positive culture. We have much to learn. We are still learning. We've had a Royal Commission. We learned a lot from that. We continue to learn. We continue to change. But it is, again, it's about that diversity inclusion, making sure that women are able to work in any space, are part of any team. We deploy women in every part of the world. We're not restricting women to any particular roles. So I think, we do utilise women to, that diversity of thought in our forums, in our meetings, in working groups, whatever it might be, to actually get that diversity of thought. But the same for the cultural backgrounds too, because, when I joined, it was very much an Anglo-Saxon male environment. And now we are very fortunate we have people from around the globe in our Defence Force. And people from all sorts of backgrounds, which we really sort of embrace that, because it is so important to get that diversity of thought in all of our planning. So,
can I just add on to that? I also think we have to I always constantly challenge the term soft skills. They're not soft, they're smart. So we call it in our industry the smart skills, because you get a juxtaposition between hard and soft. And in fact, some of the I've been in the field and been in sort of conflict type environments, and I've been engaging in diplomacy soft skills with the Russian military, with the Pentagon and others. And I can tell you that sometimes the negotiations that are often seen as soft are as hard, if not harder, than when you're facing lethal use of force. So I think one of the things we also need to do is allow women to be where they want to go and to value it all equally. And so if someone does decide to work in an area, it's more about policy, diplomacy, health security, that is as valuable as being engaged as a direct front combatant. So I think it's about encouraging women to do everything, but also reframing where we see value, what is important and what is not important. So I just wanted to add that on. So in anyone who's ever worked for me, they're not allowed to say soft skills. You've got to say smart skills.
Can I? Can I add? So I got this from my husband. He's a feminist. Because, behind every feminist man is a strong woman, and that's my mother-in-law from West Sumatra. So he said to me, honey, there is this study by UCLA, and the study says that women's brain is much more connected to the suffering and the pain. And this is UCLA study. Based on the study. And this is the reason why when I was with the AHA Center as the executive director, I ensure that there is an equal number of men and women in the assessment group. Because women tend to actually react to the pain and the suffering better, right? And more reactive. And of course, the needs are different, right? And also the way we have to respond to the needs are different. So that's one. It's just like, there are differences. And I think, again, I like that, words smart skills, but we should also not be afraid of actually exposing the advantages that we have as women. And that includes our brains.
I move to the second question. Particularly for defence, we are not a microcosm. We don't just appear. We require those people in industry to actually be the ones that feed into us and to join us. As Tish said, we welcome anyone up to the age of 55, as long as you can do your initial commitment of service. And that's very much applicable to those mid-career personnel that were looking for a change. And so I think the big role for industry is to also grow those people. To make sure that you're a welcoming place for women and men and other religions, making sure that it is a broad diversity of thought throughout industry. We're working close by alongside. Out at Joint Operations Command, we actually talk about our 5 services, which is Army, Navy, Air Force, as well as public service and contractors, so defence. So the Chief actually addressed that just a couple of days ago. And we need that to have just as much diversity of thought as we do in the military.
Okay, fantastic. I'm conscious of the time, and we are kind of nearing the end of the hour, more than an hour actually we are taken. But before we wrap up, I have one final rapid fire kind of question to all of you, because all of you come with such fantastic experience, the kind of interesting and maybe, difficult journeys that you have gone through in a sense within the defense, peace and security work. What is that one lesson or one piece of advice that you think is so important that you want to give it to someone who's just beginning their process, their journey in a sense, or who still want to have a mission to carry this whole agenda forward? So if I can start with you there.
Just be your authentic self and you know, strive for whatever goals you think that you want to do, you can do it. So I think it's really about you know, as a woman, be your authentic self, I think is the bottom line for me.
It's going to be that game where we build on, because I was going to say authenticity, but I will now add on to the word authenticity. I went shopping number authenticity, and we also, I think, don't make perfect the enemy of good. And, you know, I learned that as a very young age in negotiations. I think when you get into places, you just want to do everything, do the best you can, learn as you go and listen carefully.
I think make sure that you understand that your voice belongs in the room. It is absolutely, I'm completely beset by self-doubt, but I surround myself with people that support me. My husband, my mum, my friends, they're my greatest supporters. And very much they'll tell me that I can do something even when I think I can't. And I end up actually managing to do it. So no matter why you're in that room, whether it was as a token or a selection, your voice still belongs there, because we need to make sure that that is there.
Some of the most valuable tips I got actually came from men. And I got this 30 years ago when I started my career with ASEAN. And he said that, Adelina, the most valuable skill today and in the future is the ability to apply your experience and your knowledge from one sector or context or crisis to another. I have an MBA degree from Monash, but here I am working in peace building and humanitarian and development industry.
Lilianne.
So for me, I mean, I love what everybody said, and I had also thought about talking about listening, right? The importance of listening. But since that's been said already by Helen, I was thinking that, you know, one of the things that was really important to me, I think, was, you know, two things. I mean, one thing that my mother said when she realized I was getting into this type of work, which, you know, made her a little bit nervous, but she said, you know, do whatever you are really passionate about, what you really want to do, but make sure that you do it in a safe way, right? And I think that that is really important when you're getting into work on women, peace and security, because a lot of it's dangerous, right? And you're talking about conflict, you're talking about especially conflicts that have not been solved yet. You know, you get into all kinds of issues, and sometimes you do put yourself at risk as well. And risk as well comes in many different forms, right? It's partly exposing yourself to actual conflict situations and violence, but it's also burnout, right? It's also not knowing when to stop. It's all those types of things. And I think that, you know, knowing how to work and getting that confidence, surrounding yourself by the support, but also making sure that you are protected when you do it, I think that is absolutely fundamental. I have forgotten that sometimes when I'm in the field and in the front line, and, you know, knowing when to pull yourself back and center yourself again and think, you know, I am driven by this. I'm passionate about this. I have a responsibility to do this work, but you also have a responsibility to preserve yourself and to protect yourself. And that essentially will help, you know, the greater good as well. So
don't forget to eat and sleep.
Exactly. She's always telling me that.
Sleep.
Oh, this is absolutely fabulous. No, I think many of the points everyone said here, I think I can relate to it. And I would always used to tell my younger colleagues, I used to say, be passionate, follow your passion. That's number one. Second, the authentic bit. I think at the end of the day, you got to have that courage of conviction as to why you're doing what you're doing. If you have that, I think you can withstand a lot of pressure that might come along your journey in a sense. On a daily basis, you come across that. But I think if you are clear about why you're doing what you're doing, I think that can lead you to places you can fight in gaining that. This has been a fabulous conversation, and we could carry on for another couple of hours for sure, easily. But I'm going to end this at this point of time. I want to thank all the 5 panelists. Are fabulous women in their own way, bringing so much of experience and expertise. And thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. Thank you all. And I think there's maybe some more drinks there that we will confirm. But a big hand of applause to our panelists here.